Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 10 of Mitchell's Memories. Today I'm going to talk about my unusual experience in the fifth grade at PS 273 in Brooklyn. First, you must understand that I lived in the Boulevard housing projects, and those projects, there were many Jewish people living in those projects. I was one of them. And I can't say how many, but I would say, 50%, maybe even a little more. And therefore PS 273 was also a school that had many Jewish students. So one thing you must understand about those days about Jewish mothers and fathers was very important for them was education, education, education. See, these were the first generation, our parents, that were born in America, but they grew up with stories from Eastern Europe and the tremendous discrimination that Jewish people faced. And even in 1950s America, Jewish people faced discrimination. There were many jobs they couldn't get because of their religion. The doors were closed. So the only solution they have is education, education, education. Get a fantastic education, you get a good job, you have a good life, you'll have success. That was the plan. And so get the education, and the way you do that, you work hard. You work harder than anyone else in school. So for example, when I came home from school, my mom always checked my schoolwork, she checked my homework, she saw if I had any weaknesses, if I needed any additional help. The parents really looked after us, and in fact, it created an atmosphere of tremendous competition of who could do best. And it wasn't just the students, it was also among our parents. I recall once walking outside by the park bench, and four mothers were sitting down. And one mother said, "My child got 99% in the last examination." And then the next mother said, "Well, my son had 100% in his school examination." And then another mother said, "Well, my son had 100% and 5 extra credits in his examination." And another mother said, "Well, my daughter had 100% and 10 extra credits in hers." So you can see there was a lot of competition among the parents, and that stress on us to do well in school carried through to the students. So PS 273 had a tremendous academic record. It was the best school in our area of Brooklyn, and the atmosphere was also of discipline and respect. Was kept in check by a famous principal, Dr. Nevins, the old Irishman from who fought in World War One. He was an authoritarian figure, a disciplinarian, and he kept that school shipshape. Just as I told you, my younger brother years later waved to a friend in the hallway, just didn't even talk, and he was pulled out by Dr. Nevins and sent to the principal's office, which was the worst punishment you could possibly get. So at 273, people would say we had a fantastic academic education. But the only problem was, I asked myself now, is that really how education should be? We really memorized things and threw it back at the teacher on the exams, and we received high grades. In science, we memorized the elements tables and oxygen, hydrogen, etc., etc. In history, we memorized December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I think none of us even knew what Pearl Harbor was, but we memorized it, and we got in mathematics. We memorized 7 times 10 is 70, 7 times 20 is 140, etc., etc. We memorized that, and we got grades. But thinking back, we didn't get much. We were never taught how to think critically, how to think outside the box. There was very little emphasis on arts and music and creativity. There was no spontaneity among the students. In essence, we were like robots. So thinking back, there was some things certainly missing in our education. But all that came to an end when I entered fifth grade, and I found out my teacher was Mr. Marcus. Wow, and my mom found out that I had Mr. Marcus. She rushed to the school to see Dr. Nevins, and every parent of every student rushed to the school. Fire that teacher, get rid of him. transfer my student to another class. But Dr. Nevin said Mr. Marcus has tenure, and Mr. Marcus passed all his exams with the highest grades. I can't do anything. You just have to live with it. So the parents reluctantly left. Well, the parents were right. Mr. Marcus was crazy. He was a loony. He was a lunatic he was like not from another planet. He was like from another galaxy, far from home. He was just I can't. It's hard to describe everything about Mr. Marcus. First of all, he was unbelievably cheap. Where every other teacher came to school in the car. This is 1959. Had cars from the 1950s. He had an old car from the 1930s. It was an old convertible, and amazingly, it actually had holes in the roof, and there was in the material on the roof actually had holes in it. I don't know what happened when it rained. Then one day, my friend Arnold and we sneaked over to his car and looked in the front seat, and we were shocked. There was actually a hole in the floor of the car, near where the gas pedal and the brake are. So there's actually a small hole in the car, and on the floor. And my friend Arnold was very funny. He said, Mr. Marcus is too cheap to buy brakes. So he stops the car by putting his foot to the ground, just like that. It's like the Flintstones. So anyway, he was so cheap that actually inside the classroom, he borrowed money from students. I mean, he would say, can I borrow 10 cents, a dime? And then the next day, the student would ask for him back, and he would say, I'll give it to you next week. And one time a student was so angry, he almost got into a fight with I had to break up a fight between the student and Mr. Marcus because he wanted his 10 cents back. Yeah, Mr. Marcus was a character of all characters. And then his teaching, Mr. Marcus was a genius. He was a brilliant musician. He claimed he loved to tell stories about himself. And he was a name dropper. He would say, I work with Frank Sinatra, and I did this, and I know this famous person, that famous person. He started the day by just telling stories about himself. And students got we were told, we have to learn, Mr. Marcus, enough of this, we want to learn. He said, what do you want to learn? Math? Okay, let's do it. He prided us into wanting to learn on our own, in his own crazy way. But he was always telling stories about himself. He couldn't stop. But the craziest thing about Mr. Marcus was that he loved to eat, and he loved to eat during class while he was teaching. First, he did a little, and then he started doing a lot. Then one day he moved in bags and bags of groceries into the bookshelves in the back of the class. And he started eating regularly in front of us. And Mr. Marcus, he had students actually boil coffee for him on the radiator. And he had us serving him food. And after a while, we thought, well, if he can do it, we can do it. So next thing you know, every class, every seat, every student brought in juice and soft drinks and chips and snacks, and our desks were full, and Mr. Marcus's were full. And then one day, Dr. Nevins walked into class, the greatest disciplinarian in the history of New York City schools, walked in. And when he saw what was going on, wow, his eyes popped out of his head. His face turned red. The top of his bald head turned red. It seemed like steam was coming out of his ears. He was so angry. But professionally what he was, he held on. And I'm sure right after the class, he told Mr. Marcus and that was the end of that situation. No more food. Okay, that's how a year went. There was chaos. Most of my classmates thought that it was a wasted year. It was a terrible year. We didn't learn anything. But I'm a different type of person. I saw something else. That Mr. Marcus, the chaos, I learned from the chaos. It was different, and I learned from it. And actually, I found the students to be more motivated, more spontaneous, more creative in this class than the others. I got to know my classmates. For the first time, I heard students laugh. Saw them smile. I saw them make jokes. I saw them I saw the passions. There was controversy going on. And so everyone else thought it was a horrible situation. To me, it was just like 1 year of chaos in the schools was something very enlightening. Thank you very much for sharing.